Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's WRLA webinar. It's the Canadian Home Builders Association Net Zero Home Activities. My name is Jessica. I am the Trade Show and Event Manager for the Western Retail Lumber Association, and I'm also your host, and I'm going to facilitate any questions with our guest speaker today. First of all, I want to start off by thanking today's sponsor, All Weather Windows. All Weather Windows is Canada's largest privately owned window and door manufacturer. Launched in 1978 in a 10,000 square foot manufacturing facility in Edmonton, Alberta, the company has since expanded services to all of Western Canada. 2 commercial offices, All Weather Windows glass, and close to 800 dealers across Western Canada. With a combined capacity of over 300,000 square feet, their manufacturing plants produce a full range of award-winning, energy-efficient, sustainable, and weather-resistant window and door products for dealers. The company has been awarded the Energy Star, Canada's Manufacturer of the Year 5 times since 2010, congratulations, and has been a Platinum Club member of Canada's Best Managed Companies program for 7 years running and 13 years total. As a sponsor and a member of the Net Zero Council at CHBA national level, they're proud to sponsor this Net Zero webinar today in conjunction with us, the WRLA. And of course, I'm super excited to show a quick, fun video for you guys all. So thank you again to All Weather Windows for sponsoring today. So I just want to do a few quick housekeeping things before I introduce our speaker. You should be able to hear me and see me, but you're muted and we can't see you. If you do want to ask questions, there's a Q&A function or a chat function below that you can use to ask questions. We are recording this, so you can go back and watch it, and we're going to facilitate them at the end with our speaker, Sonia. So right now, I'm super excited. I'd like to welcome Sonia Winkleman from the Canadian Home Builders Association. She is the Director of Net Zero Energy Housing. She's been working in the field of energy efficient homes for over 16 years and joined the CHBA in 2014 as the first Director of Net Zero Energy Housing, and has led the development of the Net Zero Home Labeling Program, as well as the associated training courses and marketing efforts. Prior to the CHBA, she was the Executive Director of the Net Zero Home Coalition. Her career in the industry started at Enervision, a service organization in Alberta that delivered new home rating and certification programs such as EnerGuide, Build Green, R2000, and LEED for homes, as well as the NCAR Building Canada initiative. Her formal education is in business admin and environmental management, and she's received the environmental professional designation from the ECO Canada. So right now, I'd love to turn it over to Sonia. Sonia, are you there?
I am. Thank you so much for the warm welcome.
All right, it's all yours.
Thanks. That was a great video from All Weather Windows.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I've seen that one before.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I'm just going to share my screen here. And if you can let me know when you see it.
Yes, you are good.
Awesome. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm just going to go over the agenda before we hit into the content here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the CHBA, the Canadian Home Builders Association, as well as a little bit about the Net Zero Council. And then I'm going to talk to you about our labeling program, as well as the education initiatives. I've got a little bit of information about some of the marketing stuff that we do. And then for anyone who would like to stay up to date with our activities, there is a way you can do that. And then we'll have some time for question and answer at the end. So about the CHBA, basically we've been around since quite a long time, since 1943, and we're known as the voice of Canada's residential construction industry. We represent one of the largest industry sectors in Canada, with a membership made up of almost 9,000 companies. So as you can imagine, you guys are also in the same sector. That residential construction is a very vital part of Canada's economy. And I think a lot of folks have noticed that also over COVID, that construction and renovation has really been a key sector to help Canada's economy, well, recovery for one, but also just during COVID, it really helped support the fact that there was a lot of loss in other sectors. But we do support over 1.2 million jobs. We pay 73.6 billion in wages, and we also generate 150.9 billion in economic activity. So very large. About the council itself has been around since 2014. It was initially started really to focus on CHBA's efforts in high performance housing. Previous to net zero, many of you who are familiar with CHBA might also know that we also were highly engaged in the R2000 program, running that for quite some time as well. The council has over 60 volunteer members from a variety of organizations across Canada, and I'll show you in the next screenshot who those are. And we also have ex officio members from organizations such as NRCan, NRC, and CMHC. The mandate of the council is to deliver services that will support the members' voluntary adoption of net zero homes. And really, we want to create a strategic advantage for in the innovation space for our members, which ideally will, of course, create a market advantage for our members. So here's a list of our members. So you can see, of course, under the sponsors, there was All Weather Windows, but we also have Owens Corning Canada, BSF, Enbridge Gas, Fortis BC, Panasonic Canada. We've got a great group of builders that are involved at the management committee level. We've got some schools, we've got tons of other builders and renovators, as well as general members who are primarily from product organizations or even different associations and service organizations. There's a whole bunch of other folks involved there, the ex officio members, and then of course to stay tied into the other work that CHBA does, we also have folks from our TRC, our Technical Research Committee, and our Canadian Renovators Council also sitting on this council. So one of the things we did do before we really tried to figure out what it is that this council wanted to do is we took a close look at the barriers to market adoption. And these are barriers that were identified previously through work that NRCan did, boy, I want to say maybe 2016 or something like that. Or sorry, not 2016, 2006, around there. Anyways, it was called the Sustainable Housing Roadmap. And what we really did was we ended up honing in on what are the key ones that we might be able to impact. So marketing and promotion, I mean, really, we didn't have a clear understanding of what even net zero was. There was no definition at the time. And so we needed to decide what is net zero. From there, we also needed to create a technical standard. We actually call them technical requirements in our program because as an industry association, we can't legally call it a standard. So once we decided on the definition and the standard, we also then created training courses so we could then say to the industry, here's what we're building and here's how to do it. And then also develop a brand, which was really great because we were then able to go out to the consumers and explain what a net zero home was and what the value proposition was. So we were able to do a whole bunch of things all at the same time. And also one interesting thing that's been happening is the builders, of course, have been working on how to reduce the cost of these houses. So optimization through just figuring out what's the best way to do the wall assembly, what are the best windows to be using, even what kind of mechanical systems are available. So that really has evolved over time because when we build these really highly energy efficient homes, a lot of times there were not mechanical systems that were available to service these homes. So we would call them right-sized mechanical. So a lot of them were just far too large. And then of course, financing in real estate, there's some work that needs to happening there in terms of just appropriate financing mechanisms and some interesting policy stuff we've come across over the years as well. So when we took a look at the barriers, we decided that these were really the 4 key priorities that we wanted to focus on was that labeling program. So we could distinguish and recognize not only the homes, but the builders and the renovators as well. The educational initiatives were really important to make sure we bridge the knowledge gap and could then accelerate the industry's capacity to capitalize on this program. The marketing initiatives were, of course, to not only to develop the brand, but to build awareness and understanding of the value of the homes. And then, of course, ideally stimulate the market demand so that the homeowners or home buyers would go to the builders and actually ask for one of these homes. And then in the financial incentives area, we really wanted to not only address the initial cost of the home, so decreasing the cost, but we also wanted to find out if there was any way that we could, make a special mortgage. I'd done some research on different mortgages in the US quite some time back and, found things like what they called location mortgages. So if you lived within a 5-kilometer range of your office, that you could get a better rate because you didn't have a car, or, you were able to at least walk to work, and so you didn't need to have the expense of a car. So there's all sorts of interesting different kinds of mortgages that would be available. Energy efficient mortgages were one of them. But we haven't really seen too much of that happening in Canada because the rates are already really, really low. So there's not really a lot of wiggle room there. And so without being able to impact the rates, really the next best thing is the amortization rate, which we've seen some of the banks now going back to offering a 30-year amortization. So there's some interesting things happening there, but nothing really solid. For those of you who are visual like me, this is really, I guess, a chart showing the Net Zero Council. So we've got the 60 voting members plus the ex officio in the top box. And I've got in that 60 group of 60 people, I have 10 people who are my management committee who meet with me monthly. So they're a very, very engaged group. The Net Zero Council itself meets twice a year. That was pre-COVID. So hopefully after COVID, we'll be able to get back to meeting face-to-face again. Then there's the 4 priorities that we've identified. And then underneath the labeling program, you can see that we have different focuses. So we do have currently a net zero multi-unit residential building RD&D initiative happening. We're just started year 3 on that. So that's been, we've had lots of interesting stuff that we've learned in that project. So we do have more information on our website if you're a fan of multi-unit residential buildings and want to know more. We also just wrapped up a net zero reno pilot, and looks like we may get some more funding from NRCan to continue that work with municipalities who are also doing deep energy retrofit programs. And then we're going to explore how do we actually do this at the neighborhood scale. So rather than every home requiring a large PV array, does it make more sense for us to do something at the community scale, and then the homes just be net zero ready and they could tie into that? So that's a bit about the council. And the next thing I want to talk about is why people would want to get involved. So there's been some really interesting changes that have come over the last few months. I don't know for those of you who are not aware, but just last month in June 2021, the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act was just passed into legislation. And what it does is it formalizes Canada's target to achieve net zero emissions by the year 2050. And it has a series of interim emission reduction targets at 5-year milestones towards that goal of getting to net zero emissions by 2050. Once that was announced in June, this group, a net zero advisory body, was announced as well. They do have a website, so I do have the links in there, and you'll be able to have this slide deck when I'm done the presentation, so you can find your way to that information. But this net zero advisory body is really Canada's independent advisory group on the pathway to 2050 and all the different ways that potentially we can get there. So some interesting stuff coming. Not only that, but for those of you who are in this space, I'm not sure if you are, but I'm one of those climate dorks who pays a lot of attention to this stuff. But I do have the source at the bottom of this page as well. If you go to climateemergencydeclaration.org, you'll find that these people are tracking all of the jurisdictions globally who have declared a climate emergency. And worldwide, there's almost 2,000 jurisdictions in 34 countries who represent over 1 billion citizens. And those municipalities have all declared a climate emergency. In Canada, the Canadian House of Commons, as well as 514 municipalities that represent 37.3 million. So that's almost 100% of Canadians represented in that, have also declared a climate emergency. So this isn't something I think that's going to go away. I think this is something that just continues to grow. There is more momentum in this space. So we really would love the leaders in this space to come forward and work with us, because it's clearly something where there's momentum, and it's a great way to make sure that you're meeting the needs of the consumer, because more and more consumers are expecting energy efficiency and environmental performance. But one of the key things that we've noticed too is that municipalities in Canada are very keen to be doing work in deep energy retrofits because it is a key step towards working towards the net zero emissions by 2050 target. One of the things you'll see from NRCan, again, there's a link at the bottom, they have this critical path to 2030, both for new homes as well as for existing homes. And then there's also some more information on that document that speaks specifically to materials, windows being one of them. So actually, you know what, I'm sorry, I should have included that page as well, but I'm thinking that to those of you who are familiar, All Weather Windows is probably very familiar with that work as well. But you'll be able to find more on that document online. But it very clearly shows that they've mapped everything out and they are moving forward in this space, the federal government. So what are they doing when it comes to code? So are the building codes changing? Yes, they are. They've been working on this for a couple of years now. They have this thing that they're proposing, which is a tiered performance code of the National Building Code. And you can see here, the blue chart that comes directly from NRC, the body who is working on putting these different levels into place. So they've got several different groups that they're working with that are advising or providing input and feedback onto what those levels should look like. If you're familiar with what's happening in BC, they do have a step code in BC that they used as, I guess, a model to start with. And you'll see the chart that we've created here. It also shows what are the different improvements at each level. This is kind of where they're currently at in terms of the proposal for the envelope improvement as well as the energy improvement. And so our homes in our program, we actually found when we measured them, they basically are in between 4 and 5, or 4.5 essentially. So we are working with the folks at NRC and NRCan who are developing this to see whether or not the homes in our program can really perhaps provide some guidance in terms of where the industry is actually going to be able to get to in a cost-effective way. And of course, there's also a retrofit code coming. As I was showing in here, they are planning on putting in a code for renovations as well. I'm not quite sure how that's going to go. That's going to be an interesting process to watch because it's difficult enough to do for new homes. So I can only imagine how challenging that will be for existing homes. So really, what approach should we use? Do we use? Which would be better? So what I just showed you there with the building code would be considered the stick. What we are doing here with the Net Zero Council is essentially the carrot. We want to do the market pull through incentives and through value propositions rather than with building code, which essentially regulates and legislates the lowest common denominator to make sure that they're also keeping up with everybody else. And so we've got our net zero program. We did create these technical definitions, which basically say that a home that's qualified under our labeling program is designed, modeled, and constructed to produce as much energy using on-site renewable energy sources as it consumes on an annual basis. So we do require an EnerGuide label. So each house needs to have a blower door test done to confirm the energy performance. And then if it has met all the other requirements in our program, for our technical standard, they also get a net zero home label. If they're not full net zero and don't have the PV system in place, they can also get a net zero ready level. So we've got the 2 tiers in our program, and really the only difference, the houses are built exactly the same. They're expected to be modeled and designed and everything the same way to reach 0 gigajoules. The only thing is that a net zero ready home does not yet have the PV system in place. So on a net zero ready home, instead of seeing a 0 here, you would see something maybe on the average around 45 gigajoules, something around there. So the smaller ones, I'm actually super excited. I've been in this space for so long, as you can see, and I'm finally moving into a net zero ready home in the spring. And my house came in at 36 gigajoules modeled. So we'll see how the final test goes. So those are technical definitions, but we do have what we would call our consumer-friendly language that we use in terms of marketing the program. And the first one is our elevator pitch. So really these homes produce as much clean energy as they consume. They're up to 80% more energy efficient than typical new homes. And they use renewable energy systems to produce the remaining energy they need. Every part of the house works together to provide consistent temperature throughout, prevent drafts, and filter indoor air to reduce dust and allergens. The result is exceptional energy performance and the ultimate in comfort, a home at the forefront of sustainability. It all adds up to a better living experience. So that's the key language we use, because we found when we did consumer market research, we had focus groups in 4 cities across Canada. We were in Ottawa, Toronto, Calgary, and Vancouver. And it was really interesting that everyone tended to glom onto the fact that the home could generate as much energy as it consumed. So the solar panels were, I think, really I guess you want to call it maybe the sexy part that everyone was really attracted to, like the shiny object, the roof bling. But interestingly, when you separated what the men were gravitating towards to what the women were gravitating towards, it really did seem like the women were really focused in on the comfort, the health, and indoor air quality pieces. The men, as soon as we started talking about things like batteries and all the tech, of course, like the user interface and things, they got really excited about that. I know that's just a generalization, but that was a clear trend that we did see throughout the focus groups. And so we have 3 pillars of value that we like to propose, and one is the exceptional value. So this one really is a main one because it does again speak to the fact that it consumes as much energy as it uses, but the utility bills fall to an all-time low and they stay low all year round. The home will protect you from future energy increases. So this could become a very big deal if we see energy prices increase. Also, because they're built to higher standards than a conventional new home, a net zero home is more durable. So we've got high performance warm windows and better insulated walls and roof. And the performance and quality, of course, make it an excellent investment, whether or not you plan to stay in it or sell it. The next value proposition, this is the one that was really attractive for the women in the group. So this is really about the comfort because of the advanced construction methods, along with the superior heating and cooling and ventilation equipment, means that you've got even temperatures throughout the house. So, you know, you hear about people complaining in the summertime how maybe the room above the garage is sweltering hot and the basement is freezing cold. So that stratification of the temperature, you don't find that happening. Or even just in the middle of winter time, if you've got your kitchen table is right beside the big patio door, and you tend to always have to have like slippers on or an extra sweater because it's really drafty. These are all things that are addressed through these homes, which is wonderful because people just find that they don't realize how comfortable the house is until they've lived in it, and then they go, wow, you know what, I would never. We've actually got testimonials from some of the houses where homeowners say they'd never go back to a quote unquote normal home after living in one of these. So it's really nice to hear. Also, because of the built-in fresh air filter system, it reduces the allergens and asthma triggers such as dust, pollen, and outdoor air pollution. We've heard people say that they don't have to dust these houses as much. Another interesting one on this is that we've actually heard people say that they don't have as many little creepy crawlies or critters coming into the house because all of those usual little cracks and holes that are in a conventional home aren't there anymore. So they don't have like little ant problems or anything like that. So that's also an interesting side effect. And then of course, because they're tightly built and well insulated, they're quieter. The outside noise such as traffic, lawnmowers, and barking dogs are virtually silenced. So that's a really nice side benefit as well. And then of course, the key one, which everyone expects, is that they're environmentally responsible. So you're doing your part to protect against climate change and preserve natural resources for future generations. We again speak to the renewable energy. They also have water saving features and appliances or fixtures, sorry. And that all of these home features work together to significantly minimize your household's environmental footprint. Interestingly, when we first went out to the consumer market group, they did not tie energy efficiency directly to environmental performance, which is why we went with a green logo to really try to connect the dot for folks. So that was a fun process to go through when we did all that work. So that's basically the consumer pitch that we put out, and you can find all that information at netzerohome.com if you want to look into that a bit further. We also have some great information about where we're at with our program. At the end of December, we had 520 homes. The orange ones were net zero ready and the blue ones are net zero. We are now over 650 homes. And you can see at the end of last year what the split was in between the MURBs, the attached homes, and the detached homes. So we do find that we have more detached homes going through the program because it is more difficult to get the MURBs there, which is why we're doing that RD&D project. We're working with 6 builders across Canada. I think the closest, well, we've got a few of them out west. We had 2 in BC. Now I think we're down to 1. We've got 2 in Alberta and 1 in Saskatoon. And then I think the other 2 are in Ontario. So we're looking forward to getting some more data out of that to see, the best ways to get these more dense type of products up to net zero and net zero ready. We have quite a few qualified and trained participants in our program. We now have 58 qualified builders, which of course has gone up since the end of December. I think we're almost at 70 now. Qualified net zero EAs, we have 31 of them. Again, I think we're quite a bit higher than that now as well. And then we also have 12 net zero service organizations across Canada. And then you can see how many trained participants we have. In the first year in our pilot, we had some extra funding, which was great. It really built up a lot of momentum in terms of our training, and now it's really picked up again as well. So we're seeing lots of uptake on the training. Where are these houses built? You can see the majority of them are in climate zone 5. So we actually have the majority of homes in it's like the Guelph corridor, Guelph London area. And then in Edmonton, and then we see probably BC will be picking up as well because of what's happening with their BC Energy Step Code. Excuse me, but the next climate zone is climate zone 6. So that's all in the blue area in the chart. So that would be, I don't know, I think Calgary's still in climate zone. I think Calgary's one more. I think it's in climate zone 7A. So that doesn't count. So probably like all the ones happening in Ottawa and then in a lot of the maritime area as well. We have a map on our netzerohome.com webpage, which shows you where all of those qualified builders and renovators are. So you can click on it and you can get information on any of the builders. It zooms in and zooms out. It's a pretty interactive map. And on the bottom of it, there's actually a directory as well. So you can sort that way as well. It's really fun. And then we have some fun stats on the homes themselves. So if you were to take the average home built to the National Building Code 936, the average home in Canada uses 105 gigajoules. So you can see in the light blue there that about half of it, so 50% is for space heating. Then the next largest chunk is the occupant load. So that's like things like lighting and appliances. And then the water heating is the next largest section. But then when you go to the average net zero ready home, it actually decreases by more than 50%. So this is again the averages. So it goes down to about 43 gigajoules. And now all of a sudden we flip it. So now the occupant load, so all that plug loads with the lighting and appliances and all the kind of average things that you plug in, that's now 50%. The space heating goes down to 26%. And the domestic hot water heating goes down a bit too, down to 16%. So it's really interesting how much we're able to impact the thermal requirements, the thermal loads to bring it down. And so really what we see out of this is that the primary energy load is now electricity, because the occupant load, this is all the things people plug in. This is all electric. So this is one of the reasons why we're seeing a lot of the net zero homes go all electric. Not that it's a requirement in our program. You can use gas or electric in these homes. But that's what we tend to see with the builders that are going all to net zero. So if you want to learn more about the homes in our program, we do have a bunch of reports that we put out every year, or at least one summary report. So we've got a few of them now. And it goes into way more detail, not just on the envelope. It's got some really great information about, what kind of mechanical systems, air tightness, so all sorts of fun stuff. So if you're a member, you can log in and you can get those reports there. The 2020 report is now available and it is free for CHBA members, and you can purchase it if you are a non-member. This is something really fun that's happened too, that we've noticed a lot more renovators coming into our space. So like I said, we did just wrap up a renovation pilot. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But before I go there, I just wanted to show you that, and 200 actually is a nice number. We've got other statistics that show that a lot of the older homes that were built, I think before 86, are at like 380 gigajoules a year. So if you can imagine the decrease going down to say an average of 45 for a net zero ready home, that's a substantial decrease. And so we really do feel that moving into the existing home space is an important opportunity for our members, but as well as, of course, for the climate. But the homeowners too, they'll see energy savings, GHG savings, of course, the cost savings that come with it, but also all those value propositions I talked about. You get better comfort, indoor air quality, noise improvements. So it's quite a great value proposition. And it's really wonderful to see homeowners who just love the community they live in, they love their house, but they just want to make it better, and they're willing to invest in doing a deep energy retrofit. And some of them want to go all the way to net zero. So what we did in our pilot in year one, we created the technical requirements, we created the training, we identified opportunities for financial supports, such as things like PACE financing. We also started working with the Appraisal Institute of Canada on a product that actually came from the US Appraisal Institute called the Green and Energy Efficient Addendum. So that's something that we're still working on with them, and we've done a couple pilot homes. So we're hoping to see that really the result of that is when these homes go through these deep energy retrofits, that there is also an increase in the value of the property, not just all those other wonderful benefits I mentioned. So we're hoping to continue to expand that pilot and get some more data from that work. In year 2, we ran the actual pilot. So this is where we launched the training that we developed. We had pilot projects participate, and it was really interesting. Like we had a lot of folks who wanted to join in the project, but then the timing just didn't end up working for them, or they had delays on their side. So we didn't get quite as many as we wanted, but we had 8 participate. And then there were a couple of other renovations that we were able to get some information about what their plans were for the renovation. Those were the ones that were a little bit delayed. So we could get some sort of an idea as to what they thought they were going to do with their renovation. So now we're in year 3. This is where we're reviewing the results of our pilot. We're going to modify our label requirements for renovations, and then ideally also launch our campaign to let everyone know that we now have this reno program and homeowners can approach renovators to get the work done on their house. So interestingly, when the technical group, there was a reno working group, when they took a look at all our technical requirements, they basically decided that a net zero home is a net zero home, whether it's new or a renovation. So they didn't want to change the target. They didn't want to change the value propositions. And when we went through the technical requirements, there were really only 4 things that they decided to change. So, and they're logical exemptions that would work really well for a renovation. So for example, one of them is, we do require for a new home that there be under slab insulation, but for an older home, to pull up the slab floor and put down insulation and then put the slab back in, a lot of times either that's really expensive, or then all of a sudden in an older home, you're missing the headroom space that you need. So some folks are doing interior insulation above the slab instead, or none at all, but they're perhaps insulating the exterior. So there's a lot of different, well, not a lot, there's a few different options that they can go for. But ultimately we found that the below slab insulation didn't have such a significant impact that we would require that, and then potentially not allow a bunch of really good projects to go through our program. But we also did recognize that not all homes can get to net zero. And so when we did our pilot, we also provided feedback to NRCan about what an Energy Star renovation could look like. So we're not sure whether or not they'll pick up on that and do it. I think that there's probably some challenges in that they only have the authority from the US DOE to use the Energy Star program. So I don't know if they could just go about making a renovation standard, but at least we did provide some input there. And we do think that an Energy Star renovation would really be a great mid-step for those people who can't get all the way, or for those homes that can't get all the way to net zero. Some of the things we require in a net zero renovation, of course, as with our current program, you need to be a CHBA member, but with this one, you also need to be a RenoMark member, which is a code of conduct of making sure everyone provides written contracts. Of course, when you're doing this kind of renovation, you need to have that. Also things like liability insurance and WCB. We can't, have situations where there's someone up on a roof and if they fall off, of course, the homeowner is liable if the contractor doesn't have any insurance and WCB. So those are really important things to have in place. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who do under the table work in this space, as you're probably well aware, and that always opens people up to liability. So that's not a great thing. Then, of course, we need you to successfully complete our training. So there's advanced building science. The builder training is really just how do you get to net zero? And then the renovator training is, okay, now you know how to get to net zero. So how do you apply that to a renovation? We piloted that training in November 2020, and we're going to be launching a final version of that this fall with some of our service organizations across Canada. And then the last thing you need in order to be considered a qualified net zero renovator is to actually do a net zero or net zero ready renovation and get it labeled under our program. So here's a bunch of tools we created for the renovators. We've got checklists, we've got occupant comfort questionnaires, we've got this really cool solar production estimator for renovators, and we are finalizing at the CHBA Renovators Manual. I don't know if you're aware, but we have this amazing builder's manual. It's basically the building science Bible. It's a bestseller book across Canada every year. It's great sales. They even use them in schools for building science courses. Super great manual. And so this is basically the sister companion for renovators. So that's coming out soon. And also we had, of course, 8 pilots. So these are just profiles we did. So in this specific house here, you can see that it went from 167 gigajoules down to 0. There's one on the top right here where it went from 279 down to 56 gigajoules. So this was a net zero ready. So there's some really great information on how these homes, ended up getting to net zero. So it talks about what's in the building enclosure, the mechanicals, and what kind of renewable energy systems were in each of those. And you can find all of those at netzerorenos.com. And of course, there's the training I mentioned. So we've got the builder training, the energy advisor training, and the sales training. Those were all updated last year. We launched the renovator training last year as well. And the version 1 is being launched this fall, as I mentioned. We've got 2 new courses under development. They also will be piloted this fall, the building official training and the trades training. So we're pretty excited to get those finished and rolled out. All of these courses are now available online. So COVID kind of sped that process up for us, because we initially were just delivering these all classroom, and only one of the service organizations had just started delivering the builder training online. So it's been an interesting evolution for us to make sure that we're getting the interaction that you would normally have in a face-to-face course, still being able to have that through a webinar delivered course instead. And we also deliver webinars very similar to what we're doing today here. We've got 27 archived webinars. We this year are rolling out one every month. So you can find out more information at chba.ca/NZ webinars. Members can log in and access those archives for no cost at all. And if you are interested in learning more about the Net Zero Reno pilot, we did do a webinar on that topic specifically, and you can find that in our archives too. And then what I really love is our Net Zero Leadership Summit. This is going to be our second one. We're running this one online because if we just take a look at what's happening nationally across Canada, not everyone is in the same place in terms of being able to go back to work or to travel. So what we're going to do this year is we're going to host it online, but it's still going to be a very interactive online event. I've just putting the final touches on the agenda. We're hoping to launch registration next week, actually. So there is a URL at the top. If you want to learn more, you can go to that website. We probably just have the archived information from our last summit, which was in February 2019, but also a really good way just to kind of see what kind of content we deliver through this event. Really good way to get the leaders in the industry together and talk about things that are happening, such as the consumer marketing or the industry education. We also have some really great keynote speakers talking about how do we as an industry achieve net zero emissions by 2050. So I think this year will be a really great event. And then we have this fun thing called our CHBA Net Zero Home Award. Everyone always likes to see a little bit of bling. So on this screen, you can see our very first winner was in St. Thomas, Ontario. Then the next year we had a beautiful house from Victoria, BC win. Then we went to Guelph, Ontario the following year, and then Ottawa, Ontario. This was a lottery home for the Children's Hospital out in Ottawa. And then this past year, we just announced in May, the winner was out in North Van, BC, a nice little house. I believe this was an infill. So this was a pretty nice house as well. So those are our Net Zero Home Awards. You can also see the finalists on our webpage at netzerohome.com. We've got a great little spot at the bottom of that page, which shows all 5 finalists. And we also have access to little videos we've done on all those houses. So we can really showcase all the beautiful houses that are being done. So we want to make sure people know, because it always used to be that an environmental home was seen as something that was kind of ugly. It was a box, and maybe it looked like it was cob or straw bale or something, but as you can clearly see, that's not the case. These are still very beautiful houses. So from a marketing perspective, there's a lot of aesthetic appeal, and they're not just ugly little boxes. We also have, if you want to stay in touch, we have our monthly net zero news. And of course, we've got an archive for that as well. So any CHBA members can subscribe at communications@chba.ca. We've got lots of great content coming out every month about what's coming down the pipe, our awards, of course, training, webinars, anything that's in the news that's has to do with net zero. We usually are able to capture it and send it out to our membership. And so this is a really great way if you just kind of want a compendium once a month to kind of scan and get a sense for what's happening in this space. This is a great way to do it. And then, of course, for other information, we also have, so this first one is really the industry focus page. So here you can see, you can access our meetings and events. So this is where the summit and our annual meetings are, that information is on that button. We've got our net zero news, any of our programs. So the Renos, the MERBs, the regular program, that's all there. You can learn more about our mandate and our key priorities. We've got these portals for all of our working groups and the management committee. a lot. So it's a very active group. Like we are just go, go, go. So it's certainly not a group that's just kind of sitting back, for sure. So if you want to get engaged, there's a lot of different ways to do it. Then this main page is really about the program itself. So this is where you can access things like who to work with, who are the energy advisors you need to work with, who are the service organizations, how do you become qualified, about the program, like all that kind of information is here. This site is actually going to be getting an update very shortly, so that'll probably have a refresh with some new information. And then, of course, the consumer facing page, netzerohome.com. As I mentioned, we've got all the value proposition. If you scroll down, we've got some videos, we've got the directory, and also all the Net Zero Award winners and finalists. And if you want to reach us via social media, we are on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram at CHBA Net Zero. And you can also contact any one of us on our team. There's myself, our coordinator, Brett Cass, and our project manager, Marie Henchett. And it looks like we're potentially going to be growing quite soon. So there will be a couple new faces joining our team over the next couple months. And I would be remiss if I did not thank our wonderful sponsors. So we have Owens Corning as our silver sponsor, All Weather Windows, BASF, Enbridge, Fortis BC, and Panasonic are our bronze sponsors. So thank you so much. Without these folks providing funding, we wouldn't actually have a council, because the Net Zero Council is 100% self-funded. We do not have any money coming to our efforts through the general CHBA membership revenue. So all the work we do is through either their membership or through contracts that I'm able to get with the government or other agencies such as BC Housing and groups like that. So they're very important to the work that we do. So that's all I've got. I'm surprised I whizzed through all that. I was afraid
that was a lot of information. Thank you, Sonia. And those houses were very beautiful. So they are little gems. So we did have some questions, but I just want to remind everybody, if you would like to ask a question, to use either the chat function below or the Q&A function, and I'm watching it right now. So we had a question earlier on, if you were aware if there is any lobbying being done with city and RM tax departments regarding property taxes. Often high efficient homes have thicker walls and therefore larger footprint, which contributes to your property tax payment, increasing property taxes. Are you aware of any lobbying or that being done?
Yeah, so on top of what was already mentioned there, additionally, because these houses do tend to be more expensive. So the thicker walls are because there's more insulation, there's better windows, sometimes there's a PV system, there's better mechanical systems. So yeah, these houses, they do have a premium to get there. We've heard and we've spoken to a few folks who want to get in with the bodies that do the tax assessments. There's actually one large group in Ontario called MPAC that does it for multiple regions. We have not successfully penetrated that shell yet. So we would love, if anyone does have a good contact that they could introduce me to, I would love that, because while it hasn't, like, homeowners haven't complained about it yet, so it's not a huge priority, but we feel like it will come. So I would like to get in with some good folks there before all of that kind of hits the fan. So an introduction would be appreciated if someone knows.
Okay, you've heard the request, guys. So thank you. That was a great question too. Next question. We're curious about your thoughts on passive house versus CHBA net zero principles. Do you see the same support from government and in the market?
Yeah, that's a challenging one. So I'm kind of, I would say I am label agnostic. I've worked with R2000, Built Green, LEED, like I've worked with all sorts of different programs across Canada, and they all have a different cachet for different builders. So some builders just feel like they align more with one program than another, and that's great. I'm basically like, whatever you want to do to build a better home, fantastic. The only challenge I'm seeing with passive house compared to net zero is the principles of passive house really leverage passive solar gains, which means that you have to have the house and the majority of the glazing facing south. So when you're talking to a production builder where a lot of times they don't have any control over the orientation of the home, it makes passive house really, really tricky to achieve. And then passive house also has really thick walls as well. They tend to, from what I've seen, they tend to be quite a bit thicker than even the walls on our net zero homes. So like the previous person said, if you're dealing with a situation where the real estate is a premium and you don't have a lot of space, those thicker walls can potentially be a challenge as well. The only other thing I've heard about Passive House from some of the builders that I work with who've done both our program and Net Zero and our 2000, a bunch of other programs, is that what they're finding is that sometimes these houses will tend to overheat as well, because if you don't design in appropriate shading systems on that south-facing exposure, you'll really heat up the house. We've actually seen situations where even in our homes, to be frank, is when you're building a really airtight envelope. So think of it as if you're wearing a Gore-Tex breeze, so that's not really a good example. Okay, let's use a plastic bag, for example. I don't know if you've ever done a race and you caught out in the rain and you got to throw a plastic bag over yourself and all of a sudden you kind of get heated up. It's a similar type of concept where in these houses, if you don't have a proper ventilation system, if you don't design it with the proper shading, all of the occupant activities, so showering, cooking, breathing, all sorts of electronics being on, like that adds heat to the inside of the house. Those are called internal heat gains. Those sometimes, if you don't have the ventilation system working, they will heat up the inside of the house. And imagine now all of a sudden on a hot sunny day, you've got sun shining down on those nice, tile floors that are meant to absorb heat. It's going to get licking hot in there. And so we've seen houses where the cooling load actually increases. So we have to now account for more energy being used for a cooling system in the house to make sure that the occupants don't get roasted. So yeah, there's a whole building science behind that. So we definitely recommend if you're going to do Passive House, make sure, the trees even will help. External louvers or external shading. We just want to make sure that folks don't get toasted. And then even east-west, if you can imagine, on the shoulder seasons when the sun is low, those shading systems may not work because the sun is now coming in this way, right? So we've had some builders say that the east-west windows are actually trickier to manage because there's really no good way to do it because the sun is so low, but it's still really warm. So yeah, lots of building science principles behind both. I know I've heard the training courses for Passive House are incredible. So you'll learn a lot from the Passive House training. But I think that they both have something to offer and it's just a matter of builder choice.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much for that question, Curtis. So following along that lines, we had talked about this before we started. How do you distinguish between carbon neutrality and net zero?
Okay, so as I mentioned in my presentation, all the homes in our program have to have an EnerGuide label. The EnerGuide label not only provides the gigajoules, but it also provides a GHG greenhouse gas number as well. So it all depends on where you are. So for example, a house that's identical built in Winnipeg compared to Calgary, the Winnipeg house is going to have a lower GHG because it's using energy that's mostly hydro-based, whereas in Alberta, it's mostly either going to be gas or coal-based electricity. So even the energy that's still coming off the grid is accounted for within that EnerGuide rating. So greenhouse gases, one of those is carbon dioxide. And so carbon neutrality, that carbon is in that GHG number. So in our houses, we can say the net zero homes are low, sometimes even no GHG, the way that EnerGuide measures and calculates it. So we're certainly in our program, it's certainly working towards that, but that was not the initial intention of our program, was to be carbon neutral. It was always to make it simpler for the builder that it's energy in, energy out. So it's a very easy and affordable calculation. If you start talking about carbon neutrality, a lot of people also start talking about the difference between operational carbon, so the energy that's consumed through operation, versus embodied carbon, which is the carbon that you find in the materials that are used to build the home. There is now work happening through NRCan. They've developed a carbon calculator, which will show both the embodied carbon impact of the materials as well as the operational impact of the carbon. And it comes up with a total number. And there's some really great work. I actually, at my Net Zero Summit, I've got one of the key speakers. His name is Chris Magwood. He's one of the key people doing a lot of research in this space.
Yes, we've had him on, yeah.
Oh, great. So Chris is going to be speaking at our event.
He's a great speaker, yeah.
Yeah, he's fantastic. Absolutely. So we are looking at where that's going. And whether or not that's something we want to potentially adopt in our program, we're not sure yet. It's one of those things where the intent of our program is not to just be on innovation. Our program is not about demonstration homes, pilot homes. These are homes people are buying that are normal market homes. Yeah. And so we in our program have to specify that all the products and materials that are used have been tested to meet Canadian testing protocols, so CSA standards and things like that. And so when you have an innovative product come in, if it hasn't been tested, there could potentially be a failure. So when there's innovation coming, we just need to make sure that the innovation is science-based and that there's testing done and that, okay, yeah, there's no risk for the builder to be able to adopt that product or technology. So when it comes to this carbon, the carbon focus on the materials, we're just keeping an eye on it for now, but it's certainly on our radar.
Okay, thank you. That's great. This is more of a comment from one of our attendees, was just saying that some of the stuff you're referring to with respect to overheating cooling in passive houses is managed through PHPP, Passive House Planning Package,
Yes.
and the associated modeling. And so in the modeling, it can be accounted for in the planning phase. So
perfect. Oh, that's great. Good to know. Yeah, I'd heard about PHPP and I knew about it and I'd seen it, but I didn't know that they actually managed that through that process. So perfect.
Excellent. Well, you know, if anybody's interested, we are doing a passive house retrofitting session in September. So you'll get that information soon too. We'll talk about that.
I might have to join that.
Yes, please come. So the Net Zero Reno program, how does that work with the greener home rebates?
Yes. So for those of you who've seen those announcements, the new greener home rebates are for homes that are existing. So according to NRCan's definition, that has to be a home that's 6 months old or older. And so really what we do with our program is that if a homeowner wanted to do a net zero renovation, they could leverage that funding so they can get some money back on the EnerGuide evaluations. They can get money back for things like the air source heat pump. There's a few different things they can do. I know that there's also money towards the solar panels. The challenge for us right now is that our program is on hold because we've wrapped up the pilot and we haven't quite launched version 1 yet. But I do know that the Greener Homes program is meant to last, I think, 5 or 7 years or something like that. So by the time we launch our program, we're hoping that the renovators that have already been trained, that they can, well, not hoping, we're going to be communicating, we're going to be helping put together a package so those renovators can show, okay, here's what we have federally. Some municipalities are also, like Edmonton is rolling out a really great retrofit program. Vancouver, I believe, has one as well. So there's going to be opportunity for the renovators to basically stack different funding opportunities for the homeowner.
Okay, great.
And then that way they can take a look at, you know, where the better options are, where they can really focus their attention. And then there's also going to be the feds are going to announce a $40,000 interest-free loan opportunity. So we suspect that may potentially be a little bit more impactful for those who want to do a net zero renovation than just these other incentives on their own.
And this information can be found through the website, the netzerohome.com?
We do have a blog post that does link to it, but so far the $40,000 interest-free loan has not been announced. Okay. But I know CMHC does have a link on their website that you can sign up for, so that they'll notify you once that's announced.
Okay, great. So again, if you have questions, use the chat function or the Q&A function. I'm going to go to my next question, which is always a fun. What are the impacts of COVID-19 on net zero?
Yeah, it was actually really interesting. We, of course, were very concerned at the beginning of it, and we thought that there was going to be quite a bit of economic downturn and and that business would really slow down. But it was exactly the opposite. It just seemed like there was a lot of demand. Renovations picked up like nobody's business, as you guys probably are aware. Lumber was obviously the big one, where there's tons of shortages there. And then also, like we were hearing from the builders and renovators, that PVC windows, there was a bunch of things that were just not available. And so we just found, because of high demand and low supply, it just tended to be, and then also, of course, there were some site closures and things like that in some areas. So the stoppage of work, the high demand and the low supply just ended up being this explosion of work once things started to open up again. So we did not see a negative impact in the industry at all, really. And even on net zero, I didn't lose a single member to COVID. We did end up losing one of the members in our MERB initiative. One of the ones in BC ended up going out of business, unfortunately. So it was right when COVID started. So I'm not sure if, you know, there were contributors before the fact, but no, we didn't see a large impact.
Oh, that's great. Well, it's
not negatively anyway.
Not negatively. On the positive side, you've seen some impact. Well, that's great. So I think that is all the questions. I'm going to do a quick glance through our chat function here and see if anybody else has any questions. Please type them in now. I think we've covered all the questions. Everyone it seems to be okay. I want to remind everyone that this session has been recorded. I will send you the link to the recording if you'd like to go back and watch it. And I also want to take this opportunity again to thank Sonia for being here and thank our sponsor, All Weather Windows, for sponsoring this amazing session on net zero and the Canadian Home Builders Association activities around net zero. And like Sonia said, you can visit their website or the netzerohome.com website for more information.